One of the crucial issues that we all need to come to terms with is the nature of suffering. And suffering is an experienced reality. So at a very simple level, it's that sense of discontent, it's that sense of angst, it's that sense of depression or melancholy that can overcome us. And then more seriously, it's physical disability and pain. So it's from the toothache to the cancer. It's also human relationships. We have an extraordinary capacity to hurt each other. Unrequited love and the relations that break down. It can sometimes be humiliation. It can sometimes be harassment. And of course, it's not just human-centric. It's also affects animals. You know, nature is red in tooth and claw, said the poet, and how true that is. I mean, it's just amazing when you look at the relationship of the antelope and the lion. And then, of course, moving further out, some Christians would talk about demonic suffering and satanic suffering. So it's a pervasive aspect of creation. It's a pervasive aspect of the human condition. And perhaps for most people, it's a lived reality most of the time that they have to cope with suffering. So that's what it is. And of course, it takes a whole variety of forms. Philosophers tend to distinguish between moral evil, which is human agency, where we inflict pain on each other. And a subsection of that grouping is what's known as group evil. That is, why is it that certain groups are constantly picked on in the history of humanity? I'm thinking of the Jewish people, culminating in the Holocaust. I'm also thinking of Africans and African Americans, the slave trade followed by segregation. This is group suffering, where some seem to be less fortunate than others. And then you have natural suffering, and that's the pain inflicted by an earthquake, by a mudslide, by floods, which cause enormous devastations, by a hurricane. And then finally, you have this demonic, satanic category. So those are the types of suffering that we have to handle. One of the reasons why suffering is such a huge theological problem for the church is we believe at the heart of the universe is goodness and love, enabling everything that is and sustaining everything that is. And that love seeks to be in relationship with us all. We believe that at the heart of the universe was good intention and a desire for an environment which ultimately will be suffering-free. So there's something deeply puzzling about why God permitted suffering and evil to emerge in this universe. One thing is clear, is that all human lives are touched by suffering. And that's built into creation. I mean, mortality means that illness and aging are necessarily part of the system, and with it, ultimately, death, which means that everybody's going to be bereaved at some point in their life, and everybody's going to have to cope with their own mortality at another point in their lives. So suffering is an intrinsic part of the system. And you can sort of see why it's such a big puzzle. If at the heart of the universe is goodness and love, enabling everything that is and sustaining everything that is, why is there suffering in the system? Why does God permit suffering to be built into the very structures of creation? Now, actually, the interesting thing about this course is we'll find that there isn't really a single sentence answer to that question. The extraordinary thing about the biblical witness is nowhere is there an answer to that question. But we can sort of fathom something of the mystery of suffering and pain through two insights that are embedded in our tradition. The first is there's an intrinsic part of loving is that one has to cope with the intrinsic freedom that loving entails. I can set my computer up. I can make my computer say every single morning I switch it on, "Hello, Ian, you're gorgeous, you're wonderful, and I love you a great deal." But that means nothing. It's not the same as the affirmation of love from a child or from a spouse. When a child and a spouse utter the words, "I love you," what they mean is that out of my agency, out of who I am, I want to give to you the honor of a relationship grounded in deep and mutual affection. Now, that's completely different. And there is, I think, a real insight that actually, if you're going to have a universe where love is possible, then that is dependent on the inevitability that our agency will either be used for loving purposes or for purposes that are more destructive, more egotistical, more narcissistic, more self-absorbed and preoccupied. And in so doing, that's the world of prejudice and hatred and unkindness as part of being human. Given that God desires a universe of loving possibilities, an intrinsic part of that reality must be that we have built in the possibility of destructiveness, sin, and alienation. And that, of course, is the great theme of the fall found in Genesis 2 and 3. Another part of the reality is that if you're going to be agents who respond to God in love and respond to each other in love, you've got to be in an environment that's fundamentally stable. And the interesting thing about the structures of this creation is that there is deep stability. So shifting plates that underneath the crust of the earth that causes an earthquake are the same plates that enable the tides to turn and the environment to be fundamentally stable. And stability is a very important part. If I'm going to be responsible as an agent in this universe of ours for a decision to throw a punch and hurt somebody, I've got to be in an environment which is fundamentally stable. So those two factors seem to be part of the reason why the universe had to be like this. So God desires love in this universe, and that desire necessitates and requires freedom of agency and a stable set of environments in which we have to live in.